On a snowy Sunday in January 1847, Lewinsville Presbyterian Church was dedicated. 17 hardy members were on hand to celebrate the charter they had received in October 1846 from the Winchester Presbytery. For most of the 19th century, the membership, consisting mostly of local dairy farmers, varied from a few dozen to less than a score, but they were a faithful few. Somehow, the members were able to seed 3 additional Presbyterian churches in the surrounding villages: Vienna Presbyterian in 1871, Ballston in 1872, and Falls Church in 1873. Fortunately for the struggling church, expenses did not completely overwhelm their budget. This early 20th century ledger indicates firewood, oil, and wine were the major recurring expenses. And with the support of the presbytery, they pushed on. In 1939, when the small congregation was financially able to call their first full-time pastor, they chose a recent graduate of Princeton Seminary, Dr. Franklin Gillespie. During Dr. Gillespie's decade of leadership, the World War II generation returned home, bought cars, and began to build homes in Washington's Northern Virginia suburbs. By the mid-1950s, the modern Lewinsville Church was well established. Indeed, it was bursting at the seams. The chapel that had served them well for more than 100 years was no longer able to accommodate the congregation and its expanding mission. In late 1955, the chapel was disassembled to make way for a new and larger sanctuary. And in early 1956, construction began. The new church, when completed, provided room for more than 300 parishioners in the pews. The empty sanctuary, moments before the first service was held in the spring of 1956. By 1960, it was clear that Dunham Hall, the education building erected in 1929, was no longer serving our needs. Dunham Hall, almost 30 years old in 1959, was sold to Lewinsville member Bayard Evans for $1 and moved to his farm property adjacent to the church. Immediately, funds were raised for a new education building, and construction got underway in 1961. Lewinsville Church was quickly adapting to meet the needs of a growing McLean community. Always looking outward, Lewinsville seeded yet another church. In 1960, Emmanuel Presbyterian of McLean was established with members from Lewinsville. In 1966, Lewinsville trustees took a first option on 4 acres of property adjacent to the church and paid the estate of Colonel Henry Eglin a little over $91,000 for the home and surrounding acres. A year went by as our members began a long process of trying to decide its best use. The first committee could not reach a consensus, so it was disbanded and a new committee appointed. The second committee decided a home for the elderly should be built on the site. All agreed, but before a single brick could be laid, a major change in leadership took place. A young Gary Pinder was called in 1968 as associate pastor. Pinder, on the left, was joined in 1970 by Reverend Bill Tatum, who was called as our senior pastor. The two of them began a long overdue effort to reach out to the rapidly growing McLean community. Finally, in May 1979, ground was broken for the Lewinsville Retirement Residence. Longtime member Marie Lewis provided crucial lay leadership during the entire process. And in September 1980, the residence opened at full capacity with a long waiting list. With the addition of the retirement home, Lewinsville's presence at the corner of Great Falls and Chainbridge Road nearly doubled in size, as is evident in this 1983 aerial view. Still another expansion, Lewinsville East, took place in 2003. And today, the expanded complex is home to 175 residents. For members of Lewinsville, though, mission outreach was just beginning. Lewinsville's annual summer mission project began in the late 1980s, when the church sent out its first group of youth and adults to help the people of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. SMP, as it is known to most, sends about 50 youth and adults on an annual trip to areas of the nation in need of willing hands to build, repair, and renovate. Our youth went to New Jersey to help Hurricane Sandy victims, and to New Orleans to assist in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and to many places in between.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise God, all creatures here below.
Of course, there is far more to Lewinsville's mission than just summer work trips. Lewinsville is involved in numerous mission initiatives beyond its doors every year. While outreach to the community and to the world was pursued, another expansion of church facilities became necessary. Some 300 families contributed nearly $2.4 million over a 4-year period to expand the sanctuary, enlarge the narthex, install an elevator, renovate church offices, and build a separate music department. The growth in the music program can be attributed to a gifted musician, Jay Clark, who arrived in 1967. Under Jay's leadership, every aspect of the music program flourished. At one time, 160 persons participated in 11 choral and handbell choirs. When Jay retired in 2004, Dr. Ed Moore was called, and for 7 years, he built upon Jay's legacy. And every time there's been a change in music leadership, Carol Houston was there, expert with baton and keyboard, ready to step in and continue Lewinsville's standard of musical excellence. When Christian Education Director Susan Seehaver arrived in 1993, she instituted the workshop rotation model as the curriculum for youth in grades 1 through 6. Allison Lineberger followed and continued the teaching example of the CE leaders who preceded her, often employing unorthodox methods. In 2002, Emily Berman DeAndrea was called as Associate Pastor for Christian Formation. Her 16-year tenure made a lasting impact on every program that promoted mission outreach and community service. When Gary Pinder retired in 2005, Debbie McKinley was called. She immediately began to seek new ways to extend Lewinsville's mission into the surrounding community, including an interfaith coalition in the nearby Tysons Urban Center. Scott Ramsey came to Lewinsville as an interim pastor in the fall of 2015, and served in that capacity until he was called as senior pastor in November 2018. The new program staff was completed when Pastor Scott and CE Director Allison Lineberger were joined by John Notaft, Director of Music Ministries, and Stated Supply Pastor for Christian Formation, Reverend Anna Marie Gronenboom. The new team is building upon a history of programs for community outreach, a history only partially told here, a history full of so much more. For example, in 2007, the opening of Chesterbrook Residences, an affordable assisted living facility established by Lewinsville in partnership with Temple Rodef Shalom and Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. The Reformed Institute, established by Lewinsville in 2002, to teach the Reformed tradition to a new generation. And the many active Christ Care groups. Also, our early pastoral callers from the 1980s who became today's Stephen ministers. The programs are diverse, the opportunities to serve, many. The Pilgrims and Pioneers of Lewinsville left a legacy that is our responsibility to continue. Those pilgrims, those pioneers in the faith, were always asking, what new, what better, what else can we do? To serve our brothers and sisters who God has placed in our care. What can we do to be more like Chuck Sheffey, whose skilled hands left physical evidence of his many gifts throughout the church? Or Howard Saltzman, whose lecture series helped us engage the world in long overdue conversations? Or Marie Lewis, whose passion for building the Lewinsville retirement residence overcame every obstacle? Or Dr. Mark Andrews, parish associate, whose life was a walking reflection of what it means to be formed and living in the image of Christ. These are the pilgrims Dr. Gillespie had in mind when he reflected on Lewinsville's history at our 140th anniversary in 1986.
We must always be pilgrims and pioneers in the faith, those who are out ahead, blazing new trails, paving the way for those who will follow.
The only question remaining, where does the trail lead from here? The answer lies within the hearts and minds of those willing to pick up the mantle of the many who walked this way before us, willing to make their passion our own and blaze new trails, for that is our heritage, and this is our future.